Now it's cool to be talking about rape gangs. Why is it suddenly cool? Why is it okay? Why is it acceptable now when it wasn't when I made that? Why are we being allowed to talk about it now when we weren't when I made that program? It's because it suits the powers that be for this to be the topic of conversation right now.
Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm John Connolly, the Spectator's news editor. This week it was announced that a national inquiry into the grooming gangs will take place after the Labour government did a U-turn following the publication of the Casey review into grooming gangs and the denial about them. Joining me to discuss is James Delingpole, a Spectator contributor and someone who has been talking about grooming gangs and writing about them for a long time. Thank you, James, for joining us on Spectator TV. It's obviously been a big week for developments on the grooming gangs with the announcement this week that there's going to be a national inquiry into them following the Casey review. To start us off, what did you make of the news? Were you kind of feel a little vindicated? Are you positive about the developments that have happened this week?
This is going to shock you, John, but I really pay very little attention to the news because I don't trust it. I think that whatever appears in the news is pushing an agenda, and insofar as I'm aware of this inquiry, I know already that it's going to be a whitewash. And so the idea that suddenly all those girls who've been sexually abused over probably a period of about 4 decades, I think this has been going on since the 80s, when Ray Honeyford, for example, had his career completely destroyed for talking about these issues, and that was in the 80s. It's going to be a whitewash. We're going to be told that lessons have been learned, but lessons won't be learned, and the caravan will move on. They won't ask any of the questions that need to be asked. For example, how is it that these incidents weren't isolated? It wasn't like a thing that just happened in Bradford, say. This was happening all over the country, in Swindon, in Oxford, in London. So it wasn't a local problem. It wasn't a sort of anomaly. It was a feature, not a bug. And you think about what was required for this to go on. It had to be the case that all the councils in those areas were aware to a degree of what was going on, that law enforcement was aware of what was going on, that probably the media, the local media, and because this dates back to the time when there was still a local media, were aware of what was going on, and yet nothing was done about it. And I think that suggests that there is something very rotten in the state of Denmark. This is a problem we're not going to be able to resolve with a whitewash inquiry.
I mean, James, I think we've already seen that it's already come out about the inquiry that there's going to be more of a focus on the local side, but there's not going to be, for example, it doesn't seem at this stage to be an examination of Whitehall and central government. Do you think that's a mistake as well?
Yes. I mean, whitewash does rather explain it, but yes, this will be designed to ensure that nobody who's responsible is punished, apart from possibly a few low-level players might get reprimanded. But the corrupt system that led to these crimes will not be made uncorrupt. It will carry on as before.
I think that's one of the most just shocking things about sort of the way this was covered up is there's sort of the levels of that it goes to, as you say, local authorities, police, central government. In your mind, is there anything then that could bring justice to grooming gang or rape gang victims? Or what would that justice look like to you?
Well, I don't think there is going to be any justice, because you can't undo the mental and physical damage that was done to them. These people, these girls are scarred. They've had their lives ruined. What ought to happen is that the entire nature of our police should be questioned. I think that the police has been a failing institution for a very, very long time. I think local council corruption, and not just local government corruption, but and by corruption I don't just mean things like backhanders. I mean moral corruption. That so few people did what any. It ought to be a basic rule of a civilized society, which we supposedly live in, that people speak the truth when injustice happens. Because if you don't speak the truth, then your society deteriorates. I find it really weird that I'm being hailed as some kind of hero because I went on a TV program, and it was a horrible experience because basically the other panelists were gaslighting me. They were trying to claim on air that I was making this stuff up, that it was a figment of my imagination. Of course, Muslim gangs weren't predating on vulnerable girls. And okay, I mean, I suppose it was sort of a sort of bravish experience, and it was certainly an ordeal to go through. But I don't think that I should be congratulated for it. It should be basic behaviour. All journalists should have been doing what I did. All politicians should have been speaking out about it because people knew.
I think what's quite almost shocking about that clip, which actually we can play now, so we're just going to play a short amount of that clip now so people can see.
To the grooming gangs in Rochdale and in Rotherham, and it's not just in the north. It's in Telford, in Norfolk. It's happened. We've got these organised gangs, mostly of Muslim origin. I think we need to. It's a fact.
It is also a fact that a majority.
Let me finish. Thank you very much. You outrageous interruption.
Okay, let him finish and then come back in.
I'm not spreading lies.
I'm just telling you what the member of that audience are actually. They are screaming at you.
Why don't you read
that girl
the
is screaming at you.
If you look at the names that have come up in the court cases, you will find that most of them are of Kashmiri, Pakistani origin.
Nullify.
And
no, that's nullify now, please.
You talk about rape culture. It's a very pretty state of affairs when the police and the social workers would not deal with this problem because they were too embarrassed about being called racist.
You're turning a question. You're turning a question about sexual violence into one about religion. First point. Second point.
Talking about massive.
Can I just finish? Second point. You and I know, James, that a majority of rapes and sexual violence perpetrated in this country is done by white Caucasian people. We know this.
James, I think one of the most shocking things that I've found about that is not so much your appearance, but a sort of the audience, the presenters, the other people on the panel, their reaction. It's almost like a perfect moment captured in time of people sort of in denial, but also very sanctimonious about it. I mean, what do you think?
This was in a period of my life where I was still foolish enough to believe that the BBC was a neutral organisation. Well, obviously I was aware of BBC bias, but I credited it with something that it doesn't deserve, namely that it was ultimately interested in getting to the bottom of matters. I now realise that the purpose of the BBC of those those political debate programmes is always to get the right wing person there to have their point squashed and ridiculed. They sort of they donut the panel so that your purpose is to be the whipping boy. You are there to be exposed as an extremist. And I suppose at the time they did quite a good job. It's nice to be vindicated by time. At the same time, I'm puzzled why this story is. Why do these clips? Why are they surfacing on the internet now? Like this happened a long time ago. Why are all these people, these strangers, complimenting me? It slightly gives me the creeps because I think that an agenda is being pushed here. I think that when something trends on social media, it's because the people who use social media to manipulate public opinion have an agenda to push. And I think right now, as we're being sort of fired up for a war in the Middle East, which is what you read in the newspapers, they're hot for war. I don't think the people of Britain are ordinary people, but gradually they're working on the population to see Islam as this great threat. So it's very handy. Yeah, and let's not forget the rape gangs. What about them? And they were Muslims, and yeah, let's get angry about this. So we're being manipulated yet again.
Well, I came across the clip on my social media feed this week again, James, and also back in January when you wrote a piece for Coffee House about the appearance, actually. And I'd kind of sort of chalked it up to the fact that, one of the big changes that we've had in the past year or so is Elon Musk buying Twitter, now X. And the fact that the grooming debangs debate was even able to happen at all was because of his ownership and sort of a loosening of freedom of speech on the platform. Do you not see that as more of a positive thing as well? Or
No, I don't buy any of that. Elon Musk is not your friend. Twitter is a control mechanism. It's there to push agendas. I no more trust Musk and President Trump than I do President Xi or President Putin. They're all the same. This is the problem. That we look. Now it's cool to be talking about rape gangs. Why is it suddenly cool? Why is it okay? Why is it acceptable now when it wasn't when I made that? Why are we being allowed to talk about it now when we weren't when I made that program? It's because it suits the powers that be for this to be the topic of conversation right now. But I think the people who are congratulating me for my prescience ought to be saying, well, hang on a second. If James Delingpole was right about what he was talking about 10 years ago, and he wasn't allowed to say it then, what is he talking about now that he's not allowed to say that maybe we should be thinking about? People should stop resting on their laurels about who said the right thing in the past and instead look at what's happening now. So people should be questioning everything we're fed about the whole Israel Iran situation. People should be asking why even now we aren't allowed to ask questions about the most extraordinary event, I think, in my lifetime, which was the pandemic era, where we're somehow permitted. It's okay, we can talk about lockdowns. That seems to be okay now, but still you get heavily censored, including on YouTube, if you ask questions about the narrative generally, about medical interventions, about whether they were safe and effective. You just get shut off. So I'm not thinking, yay, I'm so brave, and people have finally recognised how brave I was. I'm thinking, why can't people wake up and defend their civilization and speak the truth about everything, not just about something when it's okay, when you're given permission to do so.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right in the sense of that truth has sort of been muddied, especially when it comes to the issue of grooming gangs that we're talking about today. I mean, one of the big developments, it seems to me, of the week is sort of the case review has finally kind of peeled back what we all knew, which is the sort of the high predominance of Pakistani Asian men and their involvement in grooming gangs. I mean, do you not see as a positive that this is something that people are talking about now, and it's causing a lot of embarrassment to people who are in power?
Well, obviously, it's nicer that attention is being paid to this terrible social problem that was allowed to last for 40 years, and it's good, obviously, that maybe, just maybe, it'll be harder for these gangs to operate in future. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, this is just drop in the ocean compared with all the other things that are going on that we're not being encouraged to talk about. I mean, look, okay, so it is absolutely true. It is objectively true and verifiable that predominantly Muslim gangs were able to predate on mostly Sikh and white girls over a period of 4 decades. But there are other forms of paedophilia which we're not allowed to talk about. We got a hint of it with Jimmy Savile, but the establishment will put a lid on the paedophilia and worse that's practiced by the establishment, and it does go on. But you're never going to get that being talked about because it's not part of the elite agenda. Whereas we're allowed to talk now about Muslim rape gangs because it has been deemed appropriate for whatever they're planning next.
Thank you very much, James.